Hello guys, welcome back to another episode of Elder Scrolls Lore, and today is, like I said in the Discord chat, this is going to be a more ambitious title, and so before we begin today, I'd like to thank Ares for allowing me to use his music, and take a shout out to the Discord chat. Feel free to join in the link in the description below or in the channel header. But more importantly, I told you this is going to be a more ambitious video because it's kind of a different format than usual. So I've spent this entire day gathering footage, writing a script, getting everything down, getting everything ready. This was a community recommended video, so basically the idea is how much power does the Emperor actually hold over the Empire. So basically what I'm going to do, kind of starting a brief background before I get into things, is I'm going to analyze how everything is. I'm going to analyze each Emperor, so I'll explain the rules a little bit in a second, but I like to say, if you guys have any other suggestions, please feel free to let me know in the comments below or in the Discord chat. Please let me know how you like this format. I hope you guys enjoy. And other than that, there's not too much to really talk about. There's no news really. So other than that, I hope you guys enjoy. Let's get to it. So today I'm going to be talking about how much power each emperor had over the Third Empire. So I'm going to be analyzing the Septim and the Mede dynasties to see what powers and authorities they ruled or had during their reigns. Now, granted, it's a bit unrealistic to analyze every single emperor in depth, because doing a brief history on every emperor in the Septim Dynasty took about 15 minutes alone. So, that being said, what I'm going to do is kind of go over each emperor and see what powers and authorities they started with and began with, and how much control they had over the realm in itself. I'm going to be comparing it to real life examples as well, so I might throw in a couple from here and there, so please know that. And also please remember that this is my interpretation of this analysis. Someone could easily interpret this information differently than I, so don't go in the comments and tell me I'm wrong. I mean, you can, but at the end of the day, it's just everyone's opinion and interpretation of things. But nevertheless, we're going to start with what is an emperor, and the emperors were the ruling figures of the Nordic dynasty, or the Nordic Empire, the Second or Riemann Empire, and eventually the Third Empire, or some argue even the Mede Empire. But emperors ascended the throne through mostly their bloodlines, with their successors being chosen by the previous ruler, and really it's handed down to dowagers of emperors, but has been done, and most notably Catrio was being crowned in absence of any heirs. When a bloodline is eliminated, a potentate is elected to rule until a new dynasty is established, and this election is organized by the Elder Council. So we'll start with the Septim Dynasty. Now, Tiber Septim obviously created the Third Empire by conquering all of Tamriel. Now, directly reflecting and comparing this to the Third Empire's real-life counterpart would be Rome. It is assumed that, like Rome's first emperor Augustus Caesar, that Tiber Septim enjoyed nearly unlimited power. Considering he later was ascended as a god, aka Talos, that being Tiber Septim, not Augustus. There was a cult, I believe, with Augustus, but that's nevertheless. Considering he was ascended to a god, he probably enjoyed many liberties, and during his reign he would give many lasting governmental reforms that would drastically increase his popularity and would impact the empire from time to come. And so basically what he probably did is he enjoyed complete control over the Elder Council, he enjoyed complete control of the military, and had the power of the people behind him. With that being said, that is outrageous. So he is probably, in terms of our strongest emperors, probably one of the strongest, if not the strongest, to rule throughout the time, and it's obvious because he's the first. So transferring that over, we next have his son, Pelagius, which in a way he would have enjoyed the same freedoms, Pelagius Septim, but he was killed before we could ever know that, 3 years into his reign, so we can't really assume too much out of that. The successor, Catrio Septim, was blessed with, quote, prosperity and good harvests, and end quote. And she most likely enjoyed relative freedom to exercise authority, and most times it kind of takes a crisis to cause something bad to happen. So in most cases, whether it's the burning of Rome under Nero or the First Barons' War in England that caused the signing of Magna Carta under King John, typically things don't cause change unless there's some serious crisis that happens. So in this case, it seems most likely that Catrio Septim enjoyed most freedoms that her family did. So next we have her successor, Uriel Septim, and he pushed for lawful reforms and promoted guilds, and seeing again as nothing terrible happened, he most likely enjoyed the same liberties and authorities as his predecessors, and so I can't really see anything turning over to the Elder Council in terms of his power, so he probably had relative freedom in terms of this. Now, Uriel Septim II is really the first emperor where we get some sort of crisis. His rule was chaotic with, quote, blights, plagues, and insurrections, end quote. And his 18-year rule I would consider very similar to Nero's in Rome, and this would most likely cause some sort of retracting of authorities and powers that future emperors would have, and empresses would have, and most likely gave some sort of authority to the Elder Council. Granted, I don't think it'd be too much because it's one emperor, it's like one bad egg isn't going to spoil the bunch in a sense. You still have successful rulers before that, so most likely this was just one bad thing and they move on and try to get on with and hope for the best of the next ruler. And that next ruler would end up being Pelagius Septim II. And now this is where things get good but will eventually turn bad. Pelagius II would dismiss the entire Elder Council and sell the seats to the highest bidder, and this was also encouraged with his vassals and the lesser kings that served him, and then this would actually most likely serve his 17-year reign and give it great prosperity, and this was likely due to the fact that he was able to have complete support of the Elder Council. I mean, he can sit there and go, well, I gave you this, so you're going to owe me support and you're going to owe me fealty. So in a sense, it's most likely at this time that this might have pulled the empire out of debt and filled their coffers, but at the same time this would lead to future corruption because it's going to create more greed and more acts of selfishness rather than selflessness for the empire. And this is what happened with Rome. One of the reasons why the Roman Empire fell is that by the time Rome was falling, there was everyone who served the Senate or served the military was out to protect themselves and out to protect what they had rather than what the empire stood for. And so at the end of the day, when there's no one protecting Rome, there's no one protecting Rome, and people are just trying to protect themselves. So in a sense, I can see this is where that will eventually lead, and we'll get there later on in this analysis. Now next was Antiochus Septim, and he neglected the empire dreadfully, and he cared more for his mistresses and wives more than actually ever governing. And so if anything, he probably enjoyed royalty, but handed governing most likely to court favorites, the Elder Council, or even his battle mage. So that being said, it's probably here at this point we start seeing a transition into the Emperor having less power and the Elder Council having more power and authority over governing and passing laws and passing edicts rather than the actual Emperor. After that we have Quintria Septim, and Quintria Septim II, sorry, and she inherited the neglected empire, and her 3-year rule was extremely unhappy, and she would go on to be imprisoned by Queen Potema in solitude, and this created the War of Successions. So with these next few rulers, I'm actually going to kind of clump them together because they're all part of the same relative era, and war is typically a distraction in terms of governing. So in terms of governmental authority that each of these emperors had, it's kind of hard to say, but militarily most of these emperors would have dominated and had a lot of power in terms of that way. So you can only assume that the Elder Council inherited all, if not most, or most if not all, the governing. So in terms of that, Uriel Septim III ruled for 6 years, and again, this is when he was fighting during the war because his mother was Potema Septim, and then there is Sepphoris Septim, and he ruled for 13 years afterwards, and he fell off his horse and died. Again, probably ruled militarily pretty strong. Then there was Magnus Septim, who was an elderly man by the time he inherited the throne, and he also fought against Potema, and he pretty much focused on punishing all the traitors in the north that sided with Potema, and it's most likely at this point that he also assumed absolute authority, being able to the fact that he was able to punish these lords and nobles that betrayed him for Potema. And then lastly, I guess in terms of this era, we'll have Pelagius Septim III, or Pelagius the Mad, who virtually didn't rule at all. A lot of it was governed by his wife. So, for this next group of emperors and empresses, Kshatriya Septim ruled for 46 years and repaired the damage done from the war, and she was strong, built diplomatic ties. In terms of diplomacy and governing, she probably regained some authority that might have been lost from the empire, but then again, she's also repairing a broken down empire, so people are going to turn to your leader. So in terms of this, they probably turn to their empress. So after she passed away, her son would take over, but I'm going to assume that her relief probably split most people in half. Either probably brought fear because she was a Dunmer and she was governing in a sense, a human empire, but at the same time, it might have been a sigh of relief because she brought relative stability to a broken empire. So next would be her son and Pelagius' son, Cassander, and he was forced into becoming emperor, but he died 2 years later, so it's hard to say whether or not he enjoyed some freedom there. So Uriel Septim IV would then rule, and this was the son of Kshatriya and Uriel Lyria of Hierarch, and he ruled for 43 years, and it was a struggle, because unlike his predecessors who enjoyed either prosperity or the distraction of war, and I would say enjoyed the distraction of war, but that being said, corruption finally settled in. Remember how I said Pelagius II sold the seats of the Elder Council to the highest bidder? Well, it's coming back to bite them in the ass now, because these families were extremely powerful, and unlike Pelagius II, who was most likely able to manipulate each member of the council because of this, it's now looking like these families had enough power to kind of void all of this. And so Uriel IV had extremely limited power, and his son Androch would actually be denied the throne later on by the Elder Council. So Septim Septim II was given the throne by the Elder Council in 247 of the Third Era, and he would go on to fight a civil war against Androch and fight a war against the Camoran usurper. And now, he was a fairly weak ruler, and this was probably done intentionally because the Elder Council held firm any power and authority that the empire would have had at this time. So, transferring over to his son Uriel Septim V, militarily, again, he is dominant. He actually was, unlike his father, he was compared to Tiber Septim in terms of power, but again, we don't know how much in terms of governing he did, because he went to campaign in Akavir and died prematurely there. So that being said, he didn't, it's hard to say what he actually did in terms of governing in Tamriel. His son, Uriel Septim the Sixth, would inherit an empire at the age 5 or 6, and at the time when he finally was able to get his authority, his power from his mother, he had nothing. Now the council held everything. So at this time, he had to use his spies and his personal guard to bully difficult members into giving him back his power in 313 of the Third Era. He unfortunately would die falling off his horse in 320 of the Third Era. Now, his daughter, Morihatha Septim, finished what her father started and regained more authority. Her military prowess was actually a bit unquestionable because she won most of her campaigns, and this was due to careful planning and organization skills. However, this would go on to piss off the Elder Council because it took too long. Now, at the same time, this also may have pushed Black Marsh further to independence, because she would refuse the Black Marsh, or the Argonian delegate, she would refuse to send aid to Black Marsh when they needed it, so that might have hurt them in the long run. Now, her child, Pelagius Septim IV, nearly united a broken empire, but was just shy of it. It took too long, and his programs didn't finish things fast enough, so it's assumed that he probably inherited the same powers that his mother did at the first place. So, with that being said, his son, Uriel Septim VII, could have been it, could have united the empire and probably had the same authority as Tiber Septim and a few of his successors. That being said, Oblivion happened. So unfortunately, it did not, and he and all his sons, I'm pretty sure all four of his sons would be assassinated, because Martin Septim, the bastard, would end up succeeding him, and, well, he died in a few days, and I guess determining how long the Oblivion Crisis happened for you, so he died prematurely as well. So that being said, there was a potentate for a while, and then eventually there was Titus Mede, and the Mede Dynasty came in. So Titus and Mede inherited a broken empire. it was under the Potentate that Black Marsh succeeded from the Empire. And that being said, the Somerset Isles under Titus Mede would also separate and would create the country of Valinor. And at the same time, they would go on to conquer Valenwood, or in a way seed Valenwood into the Aldmeri Dominion. And so after that, it's kind of probably it's most likely assumed at this point that Titus Mede had somewhat control, but was working decisively with the Elder Council, and powers were probably split in half. And it's assumed probably with his son Atreus that it was the same thing. Powers were kind of half and half. He was working with the Elder Council rather than just on his own, or the Elder Council working independently from the Emperor. It isn't until Titus Mede II where we get a bit more information, and this is where Titus Mede II would go on to fight the Great War to a standstill, but the terms of the White Gold Concordat were a bit harsh, showing that his diplomatic skills were probably a bit weak. And at the same time, Skyrim fell into a civil war, and also it's most likely at this point that Morrowind is independent, if not already, and Hammerfell would also be kicked out of the Empire because they went on to still fight the Aldmeri Dominion. So that being said, this is most likely, we have an Emperor of 3 provinces at this point: Skyrim, or half of Skyrim, Cyrodiil, and High Rock. So at this point, it's most likely assumed that in terms of those provinces he does control, he probably has full control of Cyrodiil, a good amount of control in High Rock. High Rock is still prosperous. And then Skyrim, I'm assuming if Skyrim falls, that High Rock can easily be lost because you don't have that connection anymore. But with that being said, Titus Mede II probably assumes the same amount of power his whole family has. The Mede Dynasty struggled a lot at holding power, purely because they had to get it through force and conquering everything. So with that being said, I would say that in terms of all their rulers, they probably have significant control, but not full authority, and it seems more likely that they would work with the Elder Council to make everything better for the Empire, rather than working against the Elder Council to just do whatever they want. So with that being said, in all, the strongest emperor would most likely be Tiber Septim. Tiber Septim by far was probably one of the most successful emperors out there, and that being said, he also was the first. Second to that, though, I would probably say Pelagius Septim IV enjoyed a lot of freedom, and then obviously Catria Septim enjoyed a lot of freedom. She stabilized the empire during a dying time, and it was definitely kind of a troubling moment for the empire during her reign. So that being said, do you guys agree or disagree? That is the Third Empire and how much authority or power the empire would have had. I analyzed briefly every emperor in terms of control. I'm not going to go into in-depth analysis of certain ones, or of all of them at that point. I can in certain ones, depending on which. So I want to know you guys' opinions and thoughts on this video. Please let me know in the comments below, and I want to know your opinions on the new format as well. And with that being said, please like and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.